By 1944, the tide of the Second World War had decisively, and it seemed irreversibly, turned against the Axis. The Thousand-Year Reich was trapped in a tightening vice. In the East, the Soviet Red Army, a force forged in the crucible of Stalingrad and victorious in the massive tank battle at Kursk, was now a relentless juggernaut. It was an ocean of millions of men, fueled by American Lend-Lease trucks, trains, and food, steamrolling back towards Germany. In Italy, the Allies were grimly pushing their way up the boot in a bloody, inch-by-inch fight against a tenacious German defense, and in the skies over the Reich, the combined bomber offensive saw American B-17s attacking by day and British Lancasters by night, systematically pulverizing Germany's industrial heart, city by city, to rubble. The Wehrmacht, bled white of its veteran manpower, was now conscripting teenagers and old men. To the sane men in Berlin, the war was no longer about victory, but about survival. But history is not inevitable. It is not a river flowing to a preordained sea. It is a fragile, chaotic thing, balanced on the razor's edge of individual decisions, technological races, the weather, and pure, dumb luck. The Allied victory that seems so obvious to us now was, at the time, a desperate, complex gamble. The Battle of Britain was won by a handful of pilots, the invention of radar, and Hitler's key mistake of shifting from airfields to bombing London. The Battle of Midway, which broke the back of the Japanese Navy, was decided in 5 fateful minutes. Had just one or two key moments in this massive, global conflict unfolded differently, our entire world, the language we speak, the freedoms we have, the very maps we use would be unrecognizable. We will now explore 2 of those terrifying what-ifs. Our first scenario begins on the stormy night of June 5, 1944. In our timeline, the D-Day landings were a stunning success, but a costly one, especially on Omaha Beach. The Allies deceived the German High Command with Operation Fortitude, an elaborate phantom army, complete with inflatable rubber tanks, wooden aircraft, and false radio chatter. This ghost army, the 1st U.S. Army Group or FUSAG, was supposedly based in Kent, commanded by the general the Germans feared most, George S. Patton. This brilliant deception convinced Hitler the real invasion would come at Calais, the shortest point across the Channel. This kept the bulk of his most powerful panzer divisions, the Strategic Reserve, waiting in the wrong place. The Allies had a small, fragile window to establish a beachhead before those tanks could arrive. But what if that deception had failed? What if Hitler had listened to his most brilliant general, Erwin Rommel, who insisted the invasion would come at Normandy, and that the first 24 hours would be decisive? Rommel begged for the panzers to be placed at the beaches, not kept in reserve. In this alternate 1944, Hitler grants his request. The elite panzer division's Panzerlehr, 21st Panzer, 12th SS Hitlerjugend are not waiting at Calais. They are hidden in the forests just miles behind the Normandy beaches, fully fueled, and waiting under a strict radio silence for the first sign of the Allied fleet. The bad weather, which in our world nearly canceled the invasion, is just bad enough to ground most of the Allied air support, leaving the men on the beaches tragically exposed. The landings begin at dawn. The GIs and British Tommies who storm the beaches are met not just by machine guns and bunkers, but by a counterattack of steel. The panzers, which in our timeline arrived in trickles, too late, are now on the beaches in hours. They are firing their high-velocity 88mm cannons over open sights, turning the Allied landing craft into floating infernos. The Sherman tanks that make it to shore are hopelessly outgunned, picked off at 1,000 yards. The Allied soldiers, with no room to maneuver, no air cover from the storm, and no heavy armor of their own, are trapped in a perfect killing box, caught between the German tanks and the sea. The beachhead collapses. It is a massacre, a second, far bloodier Dunkirk, the artificial Mulberry. Harbors are destroyed by artillery, and the invasion force is shattered. For the Allies, the failure is a disaster of unimaginable proportions. An entire army group is lost. Allied morale, built up for years, is shattered. In London, Winston Churchill's government faces a vote of no confidence and collapses. In Washington, President Roosevelt faces a crisis of confidence and a furious Congress, which sees its Lend-Lease aid being squandered. Stalin, in Moscow, is enraged, believing the Western allies have failed him. There is no political will, no equipment, and no logistical possibility of launching a second invasion for at least another year. Perhaps, too, in Berlin, the failure is a propaganda triumph. Goebbels hails the Atlantic Wall as impenetrable. Hitler, his intuition proven correct, is hailed as a military genius, his grip on power stronger than ever. This is not a total German victory. It is a new, more horrifying war. With the Western Front now secure, Hitler is free to do what he always dreamed of, wage a one-front war. He moves millions of experienced, battle-hardened troops and all of his new wonder weapons, the Wunderwaffen, to the Eastern Front. The Me-160 jet fighters, now safe from Allied bombers, sweep the skies of the Soviet Air Force. The new Type 21 U-boats, true submarines that can stay submerged, are unleashed on the Atlantic, cutting off what's left of Lend-Lease. The V2 rockets rain on London indefinitely. The Red Army, though immensely powerful, is now facing the undivided, desperate fury of the entire Wehrmacht. The Soviet advance, which in our world was so swift, grinds to a bloody, agonizing halt somewhere in Poland or Eastern Germany. The war drags on. 1946, 1947. The cost is too great for both sides. The world is exhausted. An exhausted, blood-drained Soviet Union, perhaps cut off from U.S. aid, and a battered, but unbroken, Nazi Germany sign a truce. The world is divided into a Nazi Reich, controlling all of Western and Central Europe, glares across a new, militarized border, an Iron Curtain, at a Soviet empire controlling the East. The United States, having lost its army in France and facing a dominant Japan in the Pacific, retreats into bitter isolation. This is the new Cold War, a terrifying, permanent stalemate between two of the most brutal totalitarian regimes in human history, with a free world that barely exists. Let us rewind. We are back in 1944, but we explore a different, even more terrifying what-if. In our world, the German atomic bomb program, the Uhrenverein or Uranium Club, failed. It was plagued by infighting, a lack of resources, and a critical error by Werner Heisenberg in measuring the absorption cross-section of graphite, forcing them to rely on scarce heavy water. Critically, Hitler had driven out the nation's greatest scientific minds, Einstein, Bohr, Fermi, Szilard, because they were Jewish. But what if it hadn't? What if Hitler, in a rare moment of foresight, had given the program his full backing in 1940? What if the Allied commando raid on the Norsk Hydro heavy water plant in Norway had failed? What if Heisenberg's calculations had been correct? In this alternate timeline, in late 1944, a blinding, silent flash illuminates the sky over a remote island in the Baltic Sea. The Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapon, is real. While J. Robert Oppenheimer's team in Los Alamos is still scrambling to solve the implosion problem. For their plutonium bomb, German scientists, perhaps led by Kurt Diebner, have successfully detonated a crude, but effective, uranium fission bomb. They immediately weaponize it, creating a warhead small enough to fit on their most terrifying and unstoppable delivery system, the V2 rocket, against which there was and is no defense. The SS seizes the project, and production of a handful of bombs begins. The Allies, unaware, continue their advance. The D-Day landings are a success. The Red Army is at the gates of Berlin. The Allies believe the war is almost won. Then it happens. A single, modified V2 rocket is launched at London, but this time, it is not a conventional explosion. The city vanishes in a cloud of fire. A second rocket strikes the Soviet staging area outside Berlin, annihilating an entire army. Hitler delivers his ultimatum over the radio: surrender unconditionally, or Paris, Moscow, and New York are next. The U.S., still months from its own test, knows this is not a bluff. Their own scientists confirm it is possible. The Allies are checkmated. The United States, still months from completing its own bomb, has no defense and no counter-strike. The V2 is unstoppable. The Soviet Union, having just lost its primary army, faces total annihilation. Roosevelt and Stalin have no choice. They capitulate. In the streets of Berlin, triumphant SS soldiers fire their rifles into the air. The war is over. Hitler has won. World domination is no longer a madman's fantasy. It is a nuclear reality. The man who was moments from suicide in a bunker is now the undisputed, atomic-armed master of the world. The new order begins immediately. The Holocaust, which was already underway, is now completed with industrial, planet-wide efficiency. The Generalplan Ost, the Nazi plan for the East, is enacted. Tens of millions of Slavs, Poles, and Russians, the undermentioned, are systematically exterminated or worked to death as slaves in vast, continent-spanning labor camps. Their purpose is to make Lebensraum, or living space, for German colonists. The historic cities of the East are razed and replaced by perfect, gridded, German farming settlements. And the hunger plan, which had already starved millions of Soviet prisoners of war, is applied to all undesirables. This is the horrible reality. The world becomes a planet-sized prison. Albert Speer's Welthauptstadt, Germania, a cold, monumental, and terrifying city, is built in Berlin as the capital of Earth, using the slave labor of millions. The SS are the new global police, enforcing racial purity laws from New York to New Delhi. Art, music, and thought are censored. Inferior races in America, Asia, and Africa are either enslaved or eradicated. The human spirit is crushed under the boot of a permanent, thousand-year, atomic-armed Reich. It is a new dark age, one of brutalist architecture, constant surveillance, and utter despair, a world where freedom is just a forgotten word. But this did not happen. The D-Day landings held by a thread. Thanks to the unimaginable courage of the men on Omaha Beach and the success of Operation Fortitude, the German atomic program faltered due to arrogance, allied sabotage of the Norsk hydro plant, and the flight of its greatest minds to America. History, as we know it, was secured by a thin, fragile margin. The world we live in today was not a guarantee. It was a victory, won by the ordinary men who, in the real 1944, threw themselves against the Atlantic Wall and held the line, ensuring these horrifying hypothetical worlds remained nothing more than a chilling warning. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, hit the like button and subscribe for more daily content.